Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips. I'm here with best-selling author Ed Timberlake. This book, Year of the Rat, was on the New York Times bestseller list for 20 weeks. There's another book, Red Dragon Rising, which congressional investigator, Annapolis graduate, fighter pilot Ed Timberlake co-authored with Bill Triplett. We were talking about the communist Chinese threat. The American people have been numbed into a sense of passivity. They don't realize that defense spending is, as a share of GNP, lower than at any time since before Pearl Harbor.
That's exactly right.
And they don't realize the degree to which our military capabilities have been decimated. While we've been cutting down, even as taxes have been rising, social spending has been going up, Communist China has not been idle. What is the condition of the Communist Chinese military? What have they been doing? And what are the apparent goals of their buildup as it now appears?
Well, you're exactly right. Our curve is down. In fact, a couple months ago, for the first time since 1937, we didn't have an operational carrier in the Pacific. Today, front page, Washington Post, 2 Army divisions are C4, which means they really can't go into combat. So we're this way. People's Republic of China studied our doctrine, studied our tactics, and paid attention to some of the people I worked for and admired, because they presented some ways in which the revolution in military affairs will affect the future of warfare. There are 2 pillars to that, presented by Andy Marshall, a brilliant man. One pillar is precision-guided munitions, these missiles that can reach out with remote sensors and fly in and go down a window. Well, they saw us in Desert Storm do that. They wanted to learn how to do it, and now they can. Through our aid, our comfort, our technology, their precision-guided munitions are superb, and their warehouses and their silos are stocked with probably many more than we have at this point. That's one half of it.
And by the way, the tragedy is not simply that we're giving it to them or that our private sector with government approval is doing it. Some of the countries we've been helping around the world have been doing it too. I read an article today in Financial Times that Israel had turned over to Communist China some very sensitive radar material. Is that something of which you're aware?
We're reading reports that there's an upgrade of an aircraft. It has to do with air control. They are using, I believe, a Russian jet. They're hollowing, a Russian transport they're hollowing out. I think it's in R&D at this point. What we found, though, is more often than not on the issue of weapons transfers, anything that People's Republic of China get, they can sell. So what has happened is that a lot of this high-tech stuff, I'm diverging here, but a lot of this high-tech stuff goes to Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Libya, which puts a nation that I worked with the people in Israel, I would defend, as one of our #1 allies in the world, our #1 ally in the world, in that part of the world, put them at great risk. And Taiwan, same thing. So what we see is bad things into China, they sell it to bad people. But going back to what they visualize as the future warfare, the other half of precision-guided munitions is information warfare, using computers to go to the homeland. Right now, there's a dust-up. They're going at Taiwan on this. There's a kind of a mini war going on right now with computers both sides. Taiwan's vulnerable. What it tells us, though, is that information warfare, for the first time since this really surrender at Appomattox, Americans have been blessed. Not since the surrender of the Confederacy have there been casualties in war on American soil. 4 hours of Pearl Harbor, it's great horror, and poor islanders in the Aleutians in World War II were also attacked, too, in Kiska. But really, America has been blessed with a heartland that hasn't been touched. Well, information warfare, as preached and practiced and studied by the People's Republic of China, can reach out and touch America in some very horrible ways. We have a whole chapter dedicated to that. We found American defense experts are very concerned about some of our vulnerabilities, as we would.
And it's not just missiles. It's not just a Chinese general threatening to launch missiles on Los Angeles.
No, they could start fires in refineries and burn down several large cities. I mean, you can just do that sort of thing with computers now. We're a bit vulnerable. I don't want to be alarmist on it, but what I'm going to tell your listeners, your viewers, is that in looking at their doctrine and looking at their tactics, they're already awarding doctorates to military officers for information warfare skills. Here's the unique thing we found. The president, we were talking earlier in the first segment about the relaxation of exports. Chairman Cox, brilliant report, bipartisan, said we're being penetrated. The high-tech stuff has gone out the door. It's dangerous. Has a whole section on supercomputers. It's really high high-tech computers with certain definitions, but it's in the book, and it's euphemism supercomputers. 600 of them went to China. By now, probably 800 or so are over there. Why is that significant? Because we found a year before they showed up, inside the Chinese press, they were recruiting students to work, quote, on supercomputers. They knew ahead of the game that they were going to probably get these things. Why? Well, the first book is money in, favors out. It's a bribery case. This is the consequence.
So they have a president of the United States who they bought, and they know what he's going to deliver to them.
Well, that seems to be the evidence stacking up here. And
let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
The one evidentiary support for Clinton not being in the bag for the Chinese is that when they threatened Taiwan several years ago, he went along with sending portions of the U.S. Navy as sort of a warning to China. How did that happen?
Well, he was goaded into it by the U.S. Congress, and in Year of the Rat, we have a chapter. And he was forced, his hand was forced by a lot of pressure, probably your grassroots effort, quite very bluntly. I'm sure you had a lot to do with it. And those carriers showed up. Well, it turns out Charlie Tree, when they showed up, took $460,000, literally in a bag now. This is the bag man. Dumps it on the president's personal charity that he liked the most, his legal defense fund. Now, if someone gives $1 to my attorney, that's $1 to me. There's no soft money. There's no hard money. There's no political money. That's directly money to Bill Clinton. The same day, Charlie Tree gives $460,000. He goes to lunch with a White House official who's pled the Fifth and handed him a memo.
Who's that official?
Mark Middleton.
Okay.
At the Palm Restaurant.
Right.
At 1:19, that memo goes into the president, the highest levels of National Security Council. The memo written by Charlie Tree, which I doubt he really wrote, because I've seen his other writings, it's unintelligible, is a direct...
He used to write menus.
Yes. Yeah, he was actually a fry cook and a greeter in a Chinese restaurant in Little Rock, and it made member triad of the Four Cs gang. What we found, though, is that that memo was very blunt. It said, you'll have trouble in your re-election. I'm paraphrasing. You better pay attention. China has a history of going to war over things like this. This is delivered at the height of the crisis. President Clinton takes that letter very seriously, fires back a letter saying, you're right, those carriers weren't there to threaten you. That answer was bought by $460,000, going to the President's Legal Defense Fund, memo going over, and the President of the United States responding. I'll challenge anyone watching this show, write to the President of the United States and see if they turn around an answer to your letter like that.
Douglas MacArthur said that Formosa, another name, beautiful island for Taiwan, is like a giant aircraft carrier floating in the Pacific. And it really is.
That's correct.
As long as Formosa, Taiwan, is there, anti-communist, independent of the People's Liberation Army, there's a limit on what communist China can do.
That's correct.
They cannot take over the Far East. They cannot be a worldwide threat to the United States. So their number one strategic objective has to be to neutralize Taiwan. And that's what they're trying to do. I believe that that's one of the reasons they're moving into Panama, because if they are in Panama and are in a position to be physically proximate to the United States, if over the next 5 or 10 years they can consolidate economic power and maybe other kinds of power in the Caribbean, it further limits our ability to defend Taiwan and undermines the confidence and independence of the people in Taiwan who are worrying about what the Chinese could do to undermine their economy. Because as you know, Red China doesn't have to invade Taiwan to disrupt Taiwan. If they simply frighten the markets there, they'll demoralize the leaders.
Yes, in fact, Panama, you've probably had many shows on this, is the worst case than you can imagine in one respect. I talked to friends who just went down and did an investigation. Costco, Hutchinson Whampoa has both ends of the canal. Big fences up now. But all of a sudden there's rapprochement with Cuba. And you're starting to see they're really clever.
This is Clinton's rapprochement with Cuba. We're now
seeing the PRC hook in through Panama.
There are plane flights, there are ball games, and you've got the PRC building a position in Cuba.
Correct. So what you're seeing is a gradual encirclement of America. I've talked to Canadian
all over the world. China's gone for choke points.
They very actively
Straits of Malacca.
Yes, sir.
Everywhere.
Spratlys. That's not a choke point, by the way. Also into Canada. The Canadian government has talked to them. They're very concerned about triad activity on our northern border, which leads me to believe now that the one prescription is to hold it periphery. We have to do that, but take the fight back like Ronald Reagan and and Mr. Casey did, and look at them and take the fight back.
Stop helping them and start checking them. We're going to talk about some of those specifics when we return after this break. We're talking about this very important new book, Red Dragon Rising, with its author, Ed Timberlake. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with Ed Timberlake, co-author of this must-read book, Red Dragon Rising. You can find it in your bookstore. What is to be done?
Well, we have to bring this up as a national agenda for the campaign. Every president has to, every presidential candidate has to face up to this as an issue. They have to be held accountable on really 3 points. 1, rebuilding the military. 2,
our military,
right, exactly. 2, making sure they have a realistic policy. They take China as it is and make prescriptive remedies. And 3, they immediately promise to stop weapons proliferation. That has to be stopped. The world is going to be awash in more and more weaponry thanks to China. I think if they just at least address those issues, we made tremendous progress.
Talk about this baloney called strategic partnership.
That's the worst. It's the worst policy I've ever seen in U.S. history.
Bill Clinton has the chutzpah to suggest that these butchers, these totalitarians, these people who've declared us their main enemy are our partners. We're sharing information with them.
That's correct.
We're showing them secrets of our training, of our practices.
They were invited into Top Gun. I was a graduate of the senior officer course, didn't fly, flew aggressor out there for a while with my reserve squadron. When you see tactics, the people develop tactics by death. I mean,
can't Congress stop this?
It's tough when you don't have an attorney general that will prosecute criminals. As an original source, I was lied to by various people, which is against the law, by the way. We turned it over for referrals, and nothing ever happened.
There's much to be done. Your book is an important beginning.
Thank you.
Ed, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching us.